Today, we're going to tackle the next step on the Founders Program. At this time, we have it labeled as course number 4. I'm always altering the courses and the phases and the stages because we're always adding to it or changing it. But as of right now, this is going to be course number 4. And this is the process of selective breeding and how it's related to creating a strain. This is what I call like a pre-course program where it's one of those courses that we talk about in a way that gets you set up and how do I want to say this?
Explain
it's like
things.
Well, it gets you set up for the Founders Program because after this, we go into talking about the various stages, and then we go into those stages in the program after that. So we're getting really close to the Founders Program, the actual Founders Program. So once we discuss what we were talking about as far as the process of selective breeding and its relation to creating a strain, we're going to start talking about and discussing the breeding methods that we use for creating a strain. And we're going to talk about, not about all of them, but the ones that we use inside the Breeders' Academy or the Founders Program. So let's begin by discussing the process of selective breeding, and then we can move on to those breeding methods that make creating improvement and maintaining the strain or your family possible. Today, I would say nearly all successful breeding of domestic animals is selective opposed to random. But we're talking about, like I said, successful breeding, that is. When I say nearly all successful breedings, there's not that many people doing it right, Frank. There's a lot more people doing what we said, random breeding. And then they're not getting the results they're expecting, and it's not turning out how they hoped. And they blame it on a lot of other things because in their mind, breeding is breeding. Breeding is just like taking a cock and a hen, just putting them together and see what you get. Okay. And it's more than that.
Well, we always say, breeding the right way is easy if you've got the directions. And that's so true. But man, without those directions, it can be very, very difficult. Very difficult. And many
but they don't know that though.
Exactly.
They don't even know they're running into a problem. They're just knowing that they're not getting the results that they're looking for or hoping for. Okay.
A lot of times they think it's their fault. You're right. A lot of times they think it's the lack of their knowledge, which it is, but they're thinking they messed them up. Not the way that they were doing it was messing them up, but they just think they done something. Oh, well, I done something wrong. And as we've said a million times, they think line breeding is the start and the finish and the overall way to breed fowl.
Yeah, they think line breeding is the beginning, the middle, and the end of a breeding program.
Yes.
And it's just one method. And we're going to talk about that here, how line breeding is used in a breeding program, but it's not the complete breeding program. But years ago, before the period of scientific reproduction, breeding was practiced by observing the bird's phenotypes, and then selecting according to the breeder's preference for a particular trait or a set of traits. But it's funny, back then, even though they did some things right, they didn't know about genetics, which gives us a big upper hand. It's like a tool they didn't have, and they made progress doing the way they did. But once we learned about genetics, it changed the game completely. But the only problem is not everybody's using it. They don't understand it, so they try to work around it.
Yeah. Well, we're true today. A lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, Kenny, just like you said, people back then, people today, even, they have no idea about the genetics. They think it's just as simple as, like we said, putting a cock and hen together, line breeding them. That's it. They run into a brick wall. They get more chickens, or they add outside blood. So you're 100% right. Genetics is the key to being successful in a breeding program.
It lets us know whether we're on the right track. It allows us, by understanding genetics, we can put the birds together that we know the phenotypes, like I was talking about. We know what the phenotypes are. We know how that relates to genetics. So we're going to know ahead of time the results we're going to get. And it's just not that way with most people. And it's a shame because I would say even back then, I mean, once we started understanding the science of breeding and selective breeding, even though we didn't know genetics, they were making some progress, but not everybody. Some of them were breeding through trial and error, and some were breeding randomly. And we're seeing that today still, even though we know a lot more. People are still breeding that way.
Yeah, and I see it. I see it almost every day. You go through a lot of forums on Facebook or just talking to someone. I was talking to somebody over the weekend, and they was talking about, well, how do I keep my birds from going on the wrong end of things if I don't add blood?
Yeah.
And I'm overhearing this conversation, and I'm wanting so bad to say something, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't let it go any farther. But that helps me understand the way people is looking at breeding or a breeding program. But what you see is a lot of that, Kenny. They think that's the only way to breed.
Yeah. And we need to get to those people because there is another way. In the Founders Program in the Breeders Academy, it shows them exactly what that is. So, yeah, it's everything I can do not to pull my hair out when I hear those kind of things. But you're right. They don't know any different. I mean, we can criticize thinking they're just fighting the system, but a lot of them just don't know.
True.
Okay. So later it was recognized that by breeding together closely related individuals and selecting the traits that were highly desirable, which we call the standouts, improvement was much quicker and the results were longer lasting. But it was through inbreeding, which is responsible for locking in the genes, fixing the traits. The process of creating a pure strain was greatly accelerated just because of what we know about inbreeding. Inbreeding, again, when it came to understanding the methods and the process of selecting a strain, changed the game. It's the same thing that everybody's afraid of. They guard against it. They work against it. They're scared to death of it. And they do everything they can not to do any inbreeding. And if the truth be told, there's just no way to create a strain without some inbreeding. And the Founders Program really shows you how to use it properly.
And that's something there, Kenny, can be very dangerous. It's an easy process if you know the way. But that's something I always tell people. If you're not up on doing this method, well, I don't even really call it a method. It's more of a tool, the inbreeding.
I think of it as a tool too.
Mm-hmm. And basically, you use that tool to see what's in that geno of those birds, and you're going to get terrible, you're mediocre, and the good. But it allows you to see. But one thing I want to stress to them: inbreeding does not make the bad, the good. It just shows you what's there.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something there, and this is only where they tend to talk about inbreeding, and I think they miss the bigger picture. Because when they use inbreeding, they say, okay, we're going to bring our birds together, we're going to inbreed them so that we can see what's in there. That's just a small part of it. Okay. It's using it as a tool the way it was meant to be, in that not only does it show you what's in there, you will get the really good, the middle, and the ugly. It's a fixation tool. Mm-hmm. And what we mean by fixation, which is a breeder's wording, is that fixation means that you're fixing the trait. You're fixing the strain so that they are more predictable, they're more uniform, consistent. You're making it so you see less genetic diversity. And another word for fixing too is locking. Now, that's the layman term for fixation, is locking, because that's the way some people understand it. So we're locking the genes, we're locking the trait, we're locking that family in. And you can't do that through any of the other methods. Now, line breeding can accomplish some of that, but line breeding wasn't meant to be a fixation tool. It was meant to be a cloning tool, because what you're doing is you're taking an individual that you say has everything you're looking for. You've already eliminated the defects, the substandard traits. You've eliminated the poor constitution, the susceptibility to diseases and things like that. He has the right conformation type, color. He has the right temperament, performance. I mean, he's worthy of cloning. And that's what line breeding is. It's not a fixation tool. So without the inbreeding, you really don't have a bird ready for cloning, which would be the line breeding. When they're describing inbreeding, all they're saying is that it exposes their faults. Then it's true, but they're missing the bigger picture, and they're giving their listeners or their followers a false indication of what inbreeding is all about. So that's one of the things we're going to clear up. So when we get into stage 3, which is the inbreeding stage of the Founders Program, we're going to really talk heavy about the inbreeding method even more there. Okay,
A
because
lot
that's what
more.
that's all about. Yeah. So we're
Yeah.
going to go really deep into it.
Well, just, I know we're not in that part yet, but just give them an idea.
Sure.
My family's is already set. I've been through the Founders Program, but here's the thing. If I see something, Kenny, that pops up in a family, I use inbreeding as a cleanser to sort of reboot, to get the individuals that I want to breed back. Sort of like, and that's the reason we call it a tool too.
Mm-hmm.
It does so many other things besides show you what's in that gene pool. But I've used it just to clean a family up. Something as simple as that. So it's a great tool. It really is. It's probably one of the best.
There's a number of founding fathers, and we're going to talk about them. I want to do a whole course on it, and I'll talk about them even more in a few minutes. But it was a compilation of all what they learned, and inbreeding being a big part of it. But because of inbreeding, within a few generations, we found that the birds would reach a certain level of uniformity and consistency, and for the first time, the family couldn't be reproduced in the traits that we were looking for. Each generation, we'd see more certainty. Okay, and then because of that, the offspring would be more predictable, which they weren't. We would see a lot of genetic diversity. We'd see a lot of different, the offspring would be different sizes, different shapes, different colors, different temperaments, the whole bit. And back even then, before we understood the science of selective breeding, they were doing what we see a lot today, and that is they were random breeding. They were breeding best of the best. And because it took so long to get to where they wanted to go, they weren't really making the progress, and they would get impatient, quit, and try to something else when there was a tool at hand that they just weren't using. So
Yeah, you mentioned best of the best. When I hear that, if I go to shows or whatever, anything chicken related, I hear that breed the best of the best. I'm thinking they're struggling. When I hear breed the best of the best, I know that breeder is actually struggling with his fowl. That's the first thing
yeah,
that pops in my mind.
yeah. Well, they don't know. They that's their cop out. I think is because that's the best way that they can describe breeding, because they don't really understand the process. So instead of trying to sound stupid or sounding off or sounding wrong, they just said, "Oh yeah, I just breed my best cock to my best hen," which a lot of times isn't from an established family. It's because they're bringing in new birds, they're crossing, they're adding new blood. So they just don't know how to describe it. They don't know really what they're doing, so that's how they talk about it. I don't even think they believe it themselves. They just don't know what else to say. That's my opinion.
Or, a lot of them has been told that as well over the years. A family member, someone they looked up to has, told them that in the past, and they stick with it. They go, that makes sense. That makes sense. And they just stick with it year after year after year. But really, the ones that saying that, I guarantee you go to their home, they don't have a well-maintenance or any type program for their breeding. They're probably, just like we talked about a while ago, just line breeding and using no other method besides that. And that really hurts, because once again, they think it's something they done. So while they do, they go back, buy more fowl, try it again, same results over and over again.
Yeah. Well, they don't know what else to do. I mean, they know they're not getting the results they're looking for. Everything was going good, and then all of a sudden everything went awry.
Yeah.
And if they understood the process, they would understand why. So they panic and they go get more birds. And it's just that we talk about all the time. It's the hamster wheel that just they never get off of, and they just don't understand what's really going on. And then there's some teachers out there that's just pushing this, making them feel like they're normal, which I don't think it's normal. It may be what's happening a lot, but I wouldn't call that normal. When I say normal, it means that that's what you should expect. There's nothing you can do about it. To me, that's not normal. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
that's far
but this
from
is
normal.
all. What's that?
That's far from normal.
No, it's not what I would call normal. It may be normal
No.
that a lot of people are going through this, but they shouldn't have to.
Right.
Okay. So that, to me, that's not normal. So this has led to what we call selective breeding, and is responsible for the creation of breeds, varieties, and strains. But most of this was, we were talking about the founding fathers, but most of this was discovered by Robert Bakewell in the 1800s. That's how long ago this, we've known this and we're still not using it to its maximum. And I look at him as the father of selective breeding, but I do plan on doing a course and a program on, I don't know what I'm going to call it exactly. It may be called the founding fathers of selective breeding. And this includes Robert Bakewell, William Batesman, Gregor Mendel, Charles Darwin, Thomas Hunt Morgan, Reginald Punnett, and Fisher. And I think there's a couple more on that list too. These are the figures in history that, if it weren't for them and the knowledge that they gained through their scientific studies, we wouldn't know what we know today. We wouldn't have the breeds that we have today. And I'm not just talking about game fowl. I'm talking about domestic chickens. I'm talking about the barred rocks, the Rhode Island, the Reds, the Leghorns, the Buckeyes. None of this would have happened if we didn't have the works of these people to work off of, because what they learned is in very different directions, each one of them. But when you put them all together, it creates what we call selective breeding, the science of selective breeding. And these are the people I've studied, that I've learned so much from, that I've based the Breeders' Academy, the information that I've created in the Breeders' Academy, in my books, and now the Founders Program, and what we talk about on our shows too. So these people are very important. If you can, like I said, I'm going to put together a biography of all these, and that the information that they gained through their studies, and give you an overall picture of everything. And I'm hoping this will give you a greater understanding of how important this all is and how it all works with selective breeding.
Yeah. Well, even you talk about that, we wouldn't have the meat birds we have today. We wouldn't have the layers that we had today. I mean, even Kenny, back when we were kids or growing up, you remember your mom and dad going to the store and buying chicken. I look at where it was then and where it is now. The meats of the bird have even changed.
Oh, yeah.
And half the time, getting them to their slaughter times. I mean, and they use genetics for all this.
Think of it this way. Now, back in the 40s, 50s, I'm not sure when the Cornish cross came around exactly. I need to look up that date. I know they were around when I was a kid. Before that, if I look at some of these books, my books on chickens, we call them old dead man books, poultry books. They were high school books, college books, and that kind of thing. And those were in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and I think some of them in the 60s. Okay. Back then, they understood genetics. They understood crossing and getting hybrid vigor and getting the birds to grow faster and bigger to get the meat that they were looking for. But they were crossing like barred rocks with New Hampshires and that sort of thing. But they weren't able to process these birds until they were like 16 weeks old. So you can imagine the cost that was involved in getting those birds up to 16 weeks old. Plus you had to cook them different and all that. It's much different than today. Today we have the Cornish cross, which is a offspring that are created from basically a Cornish rooster and a white Plymouth Rock hen. Now, I do know they've changed that breeding a little bit. I know they've even added Leghorn to improve egg production for the hatcheries to get those Cornish cross. And they're still getting the hybrid vigor they were looking for, in that we're getting birds that we can process in 37 days. I always say it, they're baby chicks, okay? So you can see that, yeah, they're eating a lot of feed and they're growing really fast, but the production time is shorter, and they're able to produce more birds in a shorter amount of time and get them out. And so we're looking at, could you imagine the difference of the cost? What are we paying now? $5 or $6 a bird at the store, processed bird?
Yeah.
Could you imagine what that same bird would cost if we had to wait for that bird to be 16 weeks old?
Just in feed.
Just in feed and raising it.
Yeah.
And they can't turn over as many birds. Okay. So modern science, genetics, hybrid vigor has changed the game. And like Frank said, we wouldn't know half of that if it wasn't for these guys. Robert Bakewell, he was a naturalist, but he was a breeder too of sheep and some other animals. But he's the one that really understood, by breeding a certain way, using inbreeding and line breeding, and actually taking different methods and putting it together into a breeding program, that he could create the offspring he was looking for and make progress and then shape them any way you want it. So like I said, he's the founder of selective breeding. Then we got William Bateson, who I think, was he a naturalist too? I think he might have been, but he was a geneticist in a different way than what you'd see Gregor Mendel or even Thomas Hunt Morgan. But because of him, we were able to understand what Gregor Mendel had discovered in a bigger way. he was really instrumental in the art of selective breeding. And then Gregor Mendel, of course, he's the father of genetics. He showed us how monogenic traits work, how dominant recessive are related, just from the study of peas. And a lot of his stuff went unknown for a long time until he had retired, and a lot of his papers were burnt. He had published some. It didn't get really much attention. Finally, it did. I think, let's see, who was it? Reginald Punnett. It might have been William Bateson, and a couple other people actually rediscovered his work, brought it out in the open. They looked it over, put it through the test, and realized that everything that Gregor Mendel discovered was right on the money. And we're still using it today. We call it basic genetics. We call it Mendelism. So he was really important. And then Thomas Hunt Morgan took what Gregor Mendel did and took it to the next level. And we understand things we didn't understand before, which in some ways I think are even more important, which is sex-linked traits, polygenic traits, sex linkage. I mean, I need to make a list of all the things that he did, but that was a real eye-opener, because a lot of people, when they want to talk about genetics, they're only talking about monogenic traits. They're only talking about maybe sometimes sex-linked, but they're talking about dominant versus recessive. That's just a small part. Polygenic traits make up more of the bird than anything else. Once you understand polygenics, how to use it, how it works, then it changes the game again. I'm the only one I know of that really teach polygenic traits, which is a measurable trait that's what we call quantitative. Because it's measurable, it's improved through selection of the highest or lowest intensity, depending on what you're looking at. Because when you're looking at monogenic traits like dominant recessive, it's either a selection or a culling effect. You're either going to cull the bird or you're going to select the bird. Okay. With polygenics, it's a whole different story. You're actually selecting for the highest intensity or lowest intensity, and you're moving the strain forward without eliminating all of them. Frank, that's another show we need to do. And go deep into quantitative traits.
Yeah,
because I could go too far. I could go too far in the hole in this one right now.
Yeah, what you're mentioning though is really the foundation. The way I look at it is the foundation of genetics itself, because what he done wasn't that hard to understand. It was pretty simple. It's one of those deals. Why didn't I think of that? Those types. But it's one of my favorite, because he really laid it out to where you could even understand it.
Yeah.
So that's what I really liked it.
One of the first things he discovered was sex-linked traits. Okay, we look at Gregor Mendel as basic genetics. Okay, right. It's what you learn first. But Thomas Hunt Morgan, or what we know as advanced genetics. But a lot of people online and some of these, I don't want to go too deep into that, but they take genetics and they go too deep into it. They go into the parts where I say it's not practical. It's not useful. We can't do anything about it. Yes, it's nice to know, but and most of it's on color. They say, well, it has E plus this, and this color this is all the genetics are represented in this color. But what do you do with that? Because no matter what you're going to do, whether you see it on paper or not, you're still going to look at the phenotype of the bird and you're going to select accordingly. And all you need to know is what he's expressing. Is it dominant or recessive?
Good
okay
point.
And if it's type or conformation and some other traits, then we're looking at maybe polygenic traits. So once we understand that, and then we look at his mate and we see how they're going to, when we put them together and see how they work together, is one bird going to cancel out the other? Are they going to complement each other? Is it the bird that we're breeding it to? Is it going to help express the trait we're looking for? That's when genetics becomes really important. And so understanding Gregor Mendelism, I guess you could say, and Thomas Hunt Morgan's work, it really changes the game. It takes you to the next level when it comes to selective breeding and creating your strain.
Yeah. Well, you said it, and I brought this up many a times, but I think it's important. You've said it many times. The way to breed easy without having all these headaches is on the recessive side. You've said it a million times, to make it easy that way. And once you sit down and you think about that, just like a straight-headed, dark red, green-legged bird, pretty simple. Pretty simple.
But understand what he means by that is that we're looking for the desirable traits that we want to perpetuate so that we don't have any surprises. But some people could twist that the other way, and I want them to be careful of that when we say breeding to the recessive completely, if you look at it too extreme, it could be you could be going down the wrong road, because all the defects are on the recessive, all the diseases, all the lethal genes and things like that. So we got to be careful of that too. But what Frank's saying is, if you want no surprises and you want just to be able to take a family, put them together, and then fine tune them from there, and not have any huge diversities or variations that pop up, he's absolutely right. You go to a bird like for our game fowl, that one that's single comb or straight comb, one that's red, and one that's green legged, and you're not going to have any surprises. So there's just two sides of the coin. I just want people to be careful of that. But that's true. Like I wouldn't tell like a beginner. I think the last bird he should be breeding would be a gray with peak comb and white leg. He's not pure for those traits. People are tempted to go down the wrong road with those traits and never make the progress that they should make. A lot of times they're not going to get there. But I will say that if you breed as much as you can to the dominant, those recessives won't disappear, but they'll be hidden. And so you just got to be careful from that moment on what you're breeding from the offspring so that you don't perpetuate on accident those recessives that are going to pop up from that time to time. And if you sell the birds or give the birds away, the person getting them should know that those are possibilities. That's all. Charles Darwin was another one. Now, you don't look at him as about selective breeding, but there's many things about evolution and evolutionary biology that will really work in our favor. That really help us understand selective breeding, genetic drift, gene flow, the founder's effect. There's a number of, well, even natural selection. If we change it around to artificial selection, same thing, just different mechanisms. So natural selection, it's Mother Nature, where selective breeding, it's us. Same process.
Just
one's adaptation. Ours is desirable. Okay.
Right.
When you look at what Darwin did, see how it works side by side or in unison with selective breeding, it really opens your eyes again. And in Reginald Punnett, he created the Punnett square. Not so much a tool for pure breeding or creating a strain, maybe in the initial stages, in the first 3 stages of the Founders Program. But once you get into the foundation, Punnett square is basically useless. But it's really important when you're crossing or you're breeding birds that are unrelated or have contrasting characteristics. The Punnett square becomes really important. So it's a great tool for getting an idea what the offspring are going to look like.
And pretty accurate.
It is accurate. Yeah, it is accurate.
It really is.
Yeah. I don't want to say it's across the board and it's the way I wish it was. And I know some people are actually doing it right. But if you look at what we know today through the science of selective breeding and what we've learned from the founding fathers, selective breeding and that of creating a strain has become a systematic and methodical practice. But it's also, and this is the part I like, it's also one of art and science. Today's breeders have an incredible power to create new breeds. I don't want to say it's like playing God, but it's like looking into the bird and knowing exactly what we want them to be. And by understanding genetics and putting 2 birds together, we can actually know ahead of time and have an idea what direction they're going to go even before we breed those birds. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I've said it many times. Making your own strain and knowing that's the only one that exists in the world like it is one of the greatest things I've ever done. Next to my child being born, and my wife, that is one of the best achievements of my life. It really is. When you're holding it in your hand and admiring the beauty of them and knowing that you created that, from something that wasn't near that good. When we start, we say this all the time, Kenny, about the birds we started with. It's great. It really is.
They don't realize it's not a crapshoot like they think.
No.
It is if you don't understand genetics, you don't understand what you're looking at, you don't understand what the phenotype is telling you. But once you have the understanding of what we're talking about, then you can take 2 birds and you can basically sculpt and mold that family into anything you want. You can create new forms, you can create new functions. I mean, the different birds that are out there that are meeting certain types of functions, even game fowl. Okay, that wasn't no accident. Okay, they were bred for a specific purpose and they were selectively bred to do a certain function. Okay, meat birds, they're selectively bred to meet a certain purpose and a certain function. Leghorns, they were bred for a specific purpose and to meet a specific function. And then by knowing what birds across, they can even get better production performance. And the same thing with game fowl. By breeding certain birds together, you can improve their function and their purpose.
Yeah. Well, perfect example of that, Kenny, would be your hunting dogs. Okay. Yeah. You got raccoon dogs, you got foxhounds, and that dog has been bred for that over centuries to do a specific job, and look how they do it.
Yeah.
They're proficient in it. They're even made to be able to function to that. And we've said this many a time. A bird or an animal cannot do its job if it doesn't have the tools to do them with.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have form and function.
You know, Darwin, he used those examples. He used dogs because they all came from wolves. And through many years, through selective breeding, we were able to create all the dogs we have today. He studied chickens a little bit, but he would call up certain chicken breeders to get an idea what they were doing to create the breeds that they were creating, and then relating that to natural selection and evolution. But he also studied pigeons. So understanding how those breeds were created helped him understand evolution. And I took the methods and the mechanism of evolution to help me understand how selective breeding actually works. Okay. But the fact is, you know, we are still creating new breeds of dogs, new breeds of pigeons. We're creating new breeds of chickens every year. And I think if we accepted all of them, and a lot of people are doing a really good job with it, but if we accepted all of them, the standard perfection would be like 12 inches thick. You know what I mean? When you think about it. Yeah, because they actually take some breeds out sometimes that were accepted a long time ago, but they don't feel that they're as popular. So they actually take some breeds out, but they'll add new breeds every so often. And but the American Poultry Association, and to their benefit and to their credit, they have a strict criteria for accepting new breeds into their standard. And we tried to get the American Games in the standard. We worked quite a few years with the American Poultry Association and their chairman and president for quite a while. And we were starting to make headway, but the snags we were running into, one of the biggest ones is everybody bred their American Games different. Okay. They were always adding new blood. Asil was one of the bloods they're adding into it. Now they're doing Peruvians. They're changing the breed so much. So we couldn't give them a good example of what the American Game should look like, because they already had examples of the Old English game. They understood that game fowl can be made into a breed, Old English being one of the oldest ones, but American Games just weren't meeting the standard. And if you talk to different breeders, you go in their yard, they had every breed or strain under the sun, every color variation you can think of. So they're like, is there really a true breed here? They weren't even sure if there was a true breed. How are we going to accept them into a standard when they're not showing that they're a true breed? That you can't get at least 5 breeders together and show that they can be bred and recreated and reproduce year from year. And then the management, I guess you could say, of the American Poultry Association changed, and there was some people didn't want the American Games in there, I don't think at all. So they threw some, I want to say, obstacles in our way, saying that they had to be blue-legged now. I don't know of any American game that breed true for blue leg.
No.
So there was no way to meet that. They were being stubborn about it, so we ended up dropping the whole thing. It just wasn't going to get there. That I had a problem with.
I think that was deliberate, though. The blue leg was deliberate.
Yeah.
They knew that would be impossible to do.
Yeah. So that was a shame, but we did this to ourselves too. We gave them the ammunition that they needed to reject us, because it's one of the oldest. When you think about it, it's older than most breeds. It did go through evolution, if you think about it, from the Old English, which was the main breed that created the American Game. But there are, we have Asil in them. We have Irish. We have Spanish. There's some other breeds in there. Now it looks like we're going to have maybe some Peruvian in it, the way things are going. So it's kind of scary, but we've got to work together as a group of breeders to create a family that are uniform, consistent, that represent a breed, which is the American Game. If we don't get there, getting in the standard is one thing, but creating a true breed is another. Creating a true breed that's representative of a group of people, and creating a breed that can do the job for and the purpose for which it was bred for is another thing. And I think we're moving away from that. There's just too much mixing of blood, and we're just never going to get there the way we're going.
Well, too, Kenny, correct me if I'm wrong on this. The game bird was so highly looked at by our forefathers that I think it lost over the American eagle for this country's mascot bird by one vote?
One vote.
One vote. Yeah.
We might have got it if it wasn't for Benjamin Franklin, who had to vote for the turkey. He had to be different,
Yeah, that's right.
He
Yeah.
had to he had to make a statement. But yeah, we came very close to having the gamecock as our national bird. You got to admit, though, the bald eagle is an incredible bird.
It
We have
is
some. I didn't show it when we walked around the wild animal park the other day. We walked right by it, but we have bald eagles in there, and they're an incredible bird. They really are.
majestic. Yes,
Yeah.
they are. I was sort of glad of that though, because look how they would have turned out. They would have been a protected bird, and we probably wouldn't have even been able to own them, would we? You
I
know.
don't know.
So
Well, yeah, I don't
look
know.
at the bald eagle.
It is a domestic
you,
chicken.
yeah, you harm a feather on a bald eagle, you go to prison.
Yeah.
So
Was it
just
like
because of it.
$2,000 fine and some prison time?
Yeah.
So
I think here it's up to $10,000.
is it really?
And yeah, 5 years in jail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
for
it
harming
shows
one.
how important the gamecock at that time was to our founding fathers.
Yes.
It was the first spectator sport. It did lose to the bald eagle by only one vote, so it was highly regarded. But it's not the same anymore. You can tell by the way people are breeding them these days. They just don't really understand the bird. They don't really understand the breeding process. Yeah, the respect and the understanding is completely gone, if you ask me. Yeah.
I agree.
The process of selection, or the process of selective breeding, or the creation of a strain is made up of four main mechanisms. And we break them down in its isolation, selection, mating, and we can even broaden that by mating systems such as single mating, group mating, stud mating, even flock mating. And then the fourth one being breeding. And I would like to even broaden that into breeding programs such as the Founders Program. Now, there's other breeding methods out there, like the which we're going to work out, Frank and I, the 3 in and 1 out. That's one I have to learn. I've been looking that over. That's a very popular one. I've never really studied it. Is it? Yeah, I just never really went into that. The 1/16 infusion method they consider that a breeding program. It really isn't. The 7/8 method, which is kind of the reverse of the 1/16, and then there's a new one making its rounds called the 5/8 3/8, and we're going to work those out. We're going to show you the pros and cons of those, and show you where they maybe have the they might have succeeded, but there's some things that are holding them back too. And then we're going to compare them to the Founders Program. So we're hoping to do that too. But like I said, the main mechanisms of selective breeding is isolation. So basically what we're doing is we're taking a family of birds, we're closing the yard. We're not at this point bringing any outside blood. We're breeding within the family, and we're selectively breeding and improving that family. We were talking about that earlier, that there's a lot of people that have a problem with that because they think that there's no way to improve the family unless you are adding new blood. And like I said, if you're trying to create a strain, you're actually trying to do it right. Isolation is the number one thing that you got to understand to do. And that it means that you're not adding new blood. Okay.
Most important.
These breeding methods that we have in the Founders Program doesn't work if you add new blood, because every time you add new blood, you're starting over.
Yeah, you're destroying all the work that you've done. You're adding defect. You're adding back in the problems that you've taken out all this time. Say you work for 15 years, Kenny, on a bloodline defects. You get it where it's at. Then you add blood. You've destroyed those chickens. Are gone forever. They're history. They're gone.
Yep. So understand, isolation is number one, and it's very important. Without that, we're not able to move forward. Selection's number two. Now, selection is, I don't want to say subjective exactly, but there's a right way and a wrong way, but you're breeding towards your desires. So when I say a right way to one person is not the right way for another, depending on what he's looking for when he's breeding them. So, but selection is very important, because selection is going to allow you to improve the family each generation. And I like to add culling to that with selection, because you first cull your defective substandard birds, okay, and your sick birds. And then what's left, you select from. You select your top 10%. From there, you select your standouts. So understanding the structure of the bird, the form, function, and the beauty of the bird, understanding what to select for, what to cull for is really important, because without that, you're not going to be able to move them forward. So understand that selection's number two.
And two, on the selection part, Kenny, I'd like to add, some people are natural selectors. Some people, it just comes to them. I really believe that. Other people, and I'm proof, I had to teach myself. as far as selection. I wasn't always starting out with this. I look at them and I couldn't tell you a bad one from a good one. I'll be honest about it. I was terrible at selecting fowl. Other people would look at, well, I would breed this one. I wouldn't breed that one. And I'm thinking, well, what do they see? And I'm saying this as a kid.
Yeah.
But I learned myself to be able to select and do it. And it's very teachable. And I think if they cover the articles in the website on selection, I think they can train their eye the way it needs to be to become a good selector.
Yeah. I used to think of myself as a natural selector. I thought I had an ability that most people didn't have. Then I looked back and remembered the time when Tony visited me one of the first times, and he went through my yard, showing me all the faults of my birds and everything. And then I remembered, oh yeah, I wasn't as natural as I thought I was. But I think what I think I was a quick learner, because what Tony taught me, I learned very quick. I accepted it really quick, and I was willing to do what it takes to improve the family, which meant a lot of culling, and sometimes only selecting the handful of the birds that were actually able to move my strain forward, which isn't always the case. Now, some birds are better than others. Some birds can actually move you backwards. So I want to say I'm a natural selector, that I got it. I understand it naturally, but I think because I had such a great teacher, I was just a really good student, and I learned very easily and quickly. And then I was able to move forward. So, I'm wondering if that's the case with most people that we call natural selection. They just really had good mentors, and they were able to get on the right foot quicker, so.
But you said it, Kenny. You said the key words.
What's that?
You have to be able to do are you willing to do what it takes? Are you willing? And that's a big part of it right there, because we talked about this on a show a while back. A lot of people don't like culling. They put it off. They won't do it. They think they can take a cull and breed it and get lucky and, produce good fowl out of that cull. But you have to be tough on yourself. If you're not tough on yourself, you're not going to succeed. You have to do what it takes, just like Kenny said. You have to be willing to cull that bird. If you see that bird needs culling, don't wait till tomorrow. Cull it now.
Yeah.
Get rid of it now.
I think it's too, because some people look at some birds and they know that's not the right bird. They know they can't really breed it. They shouldn't breed it, but there's something about that bird that really appeals to them, that really meets the eye. Sometimes it's a name. Yeah, actually, I've seen that without holding on to birds that ugly as hell, have everything wrong with them, but they have a name and they're afraid this is the only one I have. Once I get rid of it, I don't have it anymore. Right. When in reality, that bird was probably not that name in the first place, never was. I think that's where good mentors come into play. Mating systems, or mating, is the next criteria. Okay, and I like to look at it as mating systems. Now, all these systems, single mating, group mating, stud mating, flock mating, they're all used for a specific reason, for a specific purpose, and we even use them differently in the Founders Program. Single mating, something you're going to do, especially in the first, I guess you could say the first 5 stages of the Founders Program, because you want to make very specific matings, and you really need to know who the parents are. It's not until, it wouldn't be until you got into the rotational program, which is the line crossing, which is the secret of this program, when you can start doing group mating. Okay, stud mating is just another way of single mating. Flock mating, it's not something American game breeders would do, but it's something that the domestic chickens would do, where they have a large pen, they have multiple roosters serving multiple hens in the same pen. That's flock mating. Okay, we wouldn't do that in American games. We'd either be using single mating or group mating, but a lot of people look at group mating differently. They just think it's for crossing, it's for producing a lot of birds. To me, group mating is a mating system that is used for a specific reason, for a specific purpose, and that is in a rotational program, such as line crossing. Oh, the fourth one being breeding programs, which is we talked about a second ago. There's breeding programs out there, but I just think there's so many faults that lie within them that I think the Founders Program is one of the best ones out there that I know of.
And that's the danger, Kenny. That's the danger. This is the worst thing that I see, is somebody using a program, or not even a program, of something they think's a program that goes halfway and dead ends, or it's just not a total program. but they're looking at it like it's gold. It's the best program ever, but they can't get to the end of it. They keep failing before they ever get, to where they can say this is my foundation foul. And I think that's a real danger. I really do, for people to look at an insufficient breeding program and think that it's all that in a cup of tea. I think that's really dangerous.
BSA Rider saying, yes, culling is what I'm seeing they don't want to do. And it is the hardest, because it's Tony
tough.
Nice to say it all the time. We could go on someone's farm, some of these the most famous breeders we have today, and I could easily cull and give them good reason for it too.
Mm-hmm.
I could cull 2/3 of the birds easy. They're just holding on to too many birds that they shouldn't be holding on to. They're holding on to birds they should have culled a long time ago, and they either don't see it, or they're what we call yard blinded, or they have yard blindness, or they just see that every bird, no matter the defect, has some kind of monetary value, and if they get sick, well, they're still not going to cull them, because they're just going to pump some medications into them, which is just hides their weakness. And those particular birds that were sick or have been sick are just going to produce more birds like them. So culling is the hardest thing to do, but it's the most important.
Yeah, but it gets easier, Kenny. You can attest
once you
to
do
this.
it. Yeah.
Once you start doing it and you just say, I'm not settling for anything else. I'm seeking perfection. You're not going to reach perfection, but you can get damn close,
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I promise you, that first bird is hard. I had the same problem. I've got a soft heart. The second bird was a little easier. The third bird, they just keep getting easier. Before you know it, you look at a bird that shouldn't be on your yard, you're not going to have a problem with it. Not one bit of problem.
I sometimes wonder, they think that if I have to cull this hard now, then I have to cull this hard all the time.
That's
point. Not the truth, because if you're culling really hard all the time, you're going to notice less defects, less sickness, less substandard birds. The quality of your birds are going to improve as you go. So be hard in the beginning. I mean, we've talked to some members, you and I, Frank, that said that culling was the hardest thing they ever did, but they just trusted in the system. They trusted in what I was teaching them. And they were like, oh God, I hope Kenny knows what he's talking about. So they started culling 40, 50% of their birds. And today, a few years later, they're amazed of the quality of the birds they have today, because not only are they culling anything that shows a defect or any kind of a problem, but now they're learning the selection process, and they're actually selecting the birds that actually can move their strain forward, and they're seeing huge results.
It's tough. It's tough at first, but I promise you it gets better if you're culling right and the way you're supposed to, and just saying, I'm going to do this. I'm not backing down. The clouds go away, the sun comes out, and you'll find it's much, much better that way.
BSA Rider saying, what I'm finding is if it has a famous name, they will not cull the bird. And that's what we were talking about a second ago. It was me and Tony who coined that phrase, the name game. We never heard anybody say that before us. And it's the name game we need to get away from, because if that thing didn't have a name on it, that bird would have been culled a long time ago. They would have not held on to that bird. And the dangers is that they're going to breed that bird. Okay. And they're going to produce more like it. Okay. So.
And this is always the main quote after the name. This is a very old line. They don't exist anymore. This is the original ones. After these, there's no more like it. That is a peddler's calling card. When you hear that, run.
And if that's the last bird and that's what it looks like, it should be the end of that line. Okay.
True.
Okay.
But you're right, Kenny. Without that pickup, they would not be able to sell those birds. Yeah. Nobody would ever even think about taking that bird home without that name.
Could you imagine the progress we could make if they weren't using names, old names of strains from a long time ago?
There'd be a lot of bad birds go bye-bye. That
would
be a good
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too. It'd raise everybody's standard. The mechanism we were talking about, the last mechanism, is breeding and breeding programs. So this includes a variety of methods of breeding, such as inbreeding, line breeding, and line crossing. I know we use more than that when you look at the entirety of the Founders Program, but these are the main mechanisms that make it work. They're considered the secrets of the program. Inbreeding we do talk about, but a lot of people don't understand the value of inbreeding and how it works. It's basically a method of fixation. We talked about that earlier. Fixing mean fixing the trait, fixing the family, making the family more consistent, uniform, getting to a point where it's not passing those bad traits. Okay. Then line breeding, which is the secret only because they don't understand how line breeding actually works. I think it's like we talked about earlier, the beginning, the middle, and the end of a program, when it's about is cloning. It's a method of cloning. When they're using methods that resemble line breeding or actually using line breeding with new birds or birds they're just starting with, they're basically cloning birds with a lot of faults still. And they're just starting too early. They're trying to clone the wrong bird. So that's a secret, the actual right method of line breeding. And then the true secret of the Founders Program, which it makes it all work. Without it, nothing works. Without it, no system works. All these other breeding methods fail because they don't have this system, and that is line crossing, which is a rotational system. It's the what we call interstrain infusion. So when we talk about infusion, we're not talking about infusing outside blood. We're talking about infusing one line to another. The way the Founders Program is worked out is once you get through the line breeding, this is weird talking about this, Frank, because now we get to talk about it. This is something we can't talk about on the live show or the podcast. So listen up, everybody, because this is it. Line crossing. Okay, line crossing makes it work. But basically, when you're doing your line breeding, if you're just doing one line breeding, you're failing. You should have at least 3 line breeding programs running at the same time. 3 lines within the same family. Okay.
Is a must. You have to have
is
3.
A must. You have to have at least 3, not 2. You can have 4 or 5, but you have to have at least 3. Otherwise, this whole program doesn't work. So basically, you're line breeding your bird. You get to 7/8 so that you don't hit and we'll talk about this more, so you don't hit the dead end zone and breed yourself into a corner to a point when you have to bring in outside blood. Otherwise, they start disintegrating on you. We have other lines. So we take the best bird from line A to the best bird to line B, the best bird to line B to the best bird to line C, and C to A. That way you're strengthening the family. You're creating that genetic diversity you need, that little variation that you need to keep the family going without adding outside blood. This is the secret to the whole thing. Okay. And we'll talk more about it because we're going to talk about a little more in this program. And then when we get into the actual Founders Program, we get into stage 6, we're going to really talk about it. We're going to go into detail about line crossing, but understand that's the thing that makes it all work. Without line crossing, line breeding doesn't work. Yeah. The Founders Program doesn't work. Without line crossing, 1/16 infusion doesn't work. 7/8 doesn't work. 5/8, 3/8 doesn't work. Okay. It's not about just taking 2 lines and bringing it together. If you've done that, you've failed, and we'll talk about that. Okay, you need at least 3 lines.
And guys, you can do this for decades. Decades.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's like Kenny was saying, that is the main secret right there. That is what the biggest part that sets it aside from any other breeding program. And a lot of breeders, when they get in and they see this, they're like, why didn't I think of this?
Yeah,
why didn't I think of this?
Yeah,
you know, because the thing about it is you're not going to get now, the line breeding part, it's set up to where you're going to be able to sell, make them better. But you put them in this rotational, you can keep them that way for years and years.
Yeah. This is the secret of never having to add outside blood ever again.
Never.
If you're going to add outside blood, you do it in a subline separate from the foundation line. You do your experimenting there. If it works out and you run that subline just like you would the Founders Program, it's the same thing. It's just a different line. And if that subline becomes better than the foundation, that becomes a new line. But you never add the subline into the foundation line, because if the subline's better, you're only going to drag it down with the foundation that now is deficient. Now, if the foundation's still better, but the subline is deficient, then you bring in the subline down. Okay. The only time I would use the subline, but as a something you would infuse, is if you're like working on one trait. And the only reason I'm saying this is because basically you're still bringing in birds from the foundation into that subline each year. Okay, so you're working on that trait, but you're still breeding it 2 birds that were in the foundation. So it's still basically the same line. You're not adding, and this is the key too. You didn't add any outside blood. This is a subline you didn't add outside. It's working on a specific trait, but it's from both birds being from the foundation line. Did I make sense there, Frank?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Yeah, that was a good
now,
point.
If you are using birds within your strain and you're working on one trait and you work that trait out, then you can infuse it in the family as long as you didn't bring outside blood. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. Okay.
Yeah, because that's crucial. That is crucial, because if not, what Kenny's telling you, if not, and you put those birds in there, you've changed them, you've messed them up. You know, you went backwards.
I want to be clear on this. So if you think you need the foundation isn't improving in some areas that you want, and you think you need add outside blood, then you add that outside blood into a subline. If that strain becomes better than the foundation after running it through the complete founders program, then that becomes the new line.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope I'm clear on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's some question about that.
Yeah. It's really touch and go with that, because there could be, it's easy to make mistakes. It really is. But that's why you've got me and Kenny. And that's why, we're making these videos to where you stay on a straight and narrow and you don't dive off a deep end anywhere. So,
yeah. BSA saying, hey, it wasn't shared with me all these years. So if they want to know, they need to join the Breeders' Academy.
And that's right. And a lot of them,
I like that. I appreciate that so much. You don't know how much I appreciate that.
The information they got, they think so valuable.
Yeah.
They're not going to share it. They're not going to tell their friends about it. They're going to use it to their benefit. And I told Kenny, I said, really, that hurts us about getting members, because everybody wants to keep it secret. And
that does hurt me when it comes to membership. And I don't want to talk too much about that. I'm not trying to promote the website.
Right.
These members are already members, but
right.
But it does affect them in a way that, I don't think we're improving or getting more members because of word of mouth. And that does hurt us.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what to do about that exactly. So if the members that are watching this or listening, if you can promote the website the best you can, because, everything we do is on whether or not the Breeders' Academy is successful. If it fails, then I just go away and get a job or something, you know what I mean? Right. But this is what I like to do the rest of my life, and I really enjoy it. And I really think this is the kind of thing that's going to change the trend. It's going to improve breeders all the way around, if we can just get enough of them in here. So
I think the members that's in here today is going to be the breeders of tomorrow's quality fowl.
And I think the breeders who are holding out and not getting into the Breeders' Academy, and maybe even trying to diminish its value, they're going to be left behind someday. I really do believe that, because this works for everybody.
I would almost guarantee they'll be left behind.
It's just a matter of time.
When you don't take science serious, and you make a muck of it and you throw it to the side, you're making a mistake.
Yeah,
you really are.
Okay, so the Founders Program is centered on the methods that we were just talking about. Okay, and those are the methods that are the secret behind that program. Inbreeding and line crossing being the most important. Okay, otherwise what we'd call fixation and rotation. That rotation, people don't realize, when they look at those other programs that exist, they don't realize how important that the fixation of the traits are and the rotation of the family down the road.
When we're doing a coaching call, especially when I started doing coaching calls, and I would bring this up the first time to the member that I was doing a coaching call with, their mouth would be like, when they realized, how good this line crossing was and the rotational system, they explained it to them. They're like, man, that is ingenious. It's simple, but it's ingenious. I should have thought of this.
I've gotten, I don't want to say fights, but I've gotten some people pretty mad at me, and I've even lost some friends that were great breeders because I let out the importance and I really laid out inbreeding. Okay. Because everybody's telling everybody, don't inbreed, never inbreed. Okay.
Yeah. Purposely.
Yeah. Some of them purposely, some of them, Tony's one of them who really believes inbreeding's a bad thing. And him and I just go back and forth on that all the time. We just don't see eye to eye. Tony is a great breeder in that he knows what birds to select. He really understands the selection process. He understands the true structure and form of the bird and the color. He really understands that really well, but he really doesn't understand the breeding process. He's kind of, I kind of want to say old school.
Yeah.
He's kind of those breed the best of the best. And he sometimes never makes the progress he wants to make. And it's always lagging because he really fights it. Okay. But him and I go back and forth on that. Oh yeah. I lost some friends because line crossing was the rotational system was what it made all work. And they were like, now these people aren't going to come back. They think they can breed their strains forever. They're asking me questions that they shouldn't be asking me. That line crossing was huge. When I learned it too, it was like, wow, that changed everything. Everybody understand. A lot of people understand inbreeding. A lot of people understand line breeding for the most part. Okay. But a lot of people don't even know about line crossing. They don't know that rotational system is what's important. That's why if you're listening to a breeder who says I got a pure strain, I only add new blood every 5 or 6 years, they know nothing about line crossing or the rotational system at all. They don't.
With that, you don't have to do all that infusion of outside blood.
Yeah.
And once again, and you've heard this a million times from me and Kenny, when you add outside blood, you're taking a chance of starting over. You are going to start over, but you're taking a chance of getting disease traits that can destroy your hard-earned work by adding it. And with this, you don't have to chance that. You don't have to take those chances. You don't have to second guess yourself. And the thing of this, you can keep that strain the way you have it at the time while still improving it in the same program for years, a lifetime. If you're doing it properly, you can do it a lifetime and never have to worry.
But you still have to understand the culling and selection process. You need to know what the true form and function of the bird is. You have to understand the breed that you're breeding, all that. So it's a complete package. It's not simple. I'll admit it's not simple, but
it's not a lot of information. A lot of information.
But along with that, when we talk about inbreeding and outcrossing, no, not so much outcrossing, I wouldn't say, but inbreeding has become so controversial.
Yeah.
Okay. But when we look at the practices and the teachings of the father of selective breeding, Robert Bakewell, and he's the one that really showed the importance of inbreeding. But yet it's still controversial. But because of what he taught us and the ones that followed his teachings, we can see the results are outstanding. But inbreeding is widely feared and misunderstood, but very important. But you can't create a strain without some inbreeding. It's just impossible. You got to embrace it.
And, there's a lot of people out there, Kenny, that has done the in and in breeding for 30 years, and they think they've got a pure strain. But I agree with you. There's no way they can have an actual, what you want to call a pure strain without actually doing the inbreed process. There's no way.
No. BSA writer saying I fell out of my chair when I got to reading on the line crossing process. And that's the result. That's the reaction we're hearing from most of the members.
Yes.
It's one of my members. But one of the members said, okay, once I learned, I got a handle on the founders program and I learned the secret, which was line crossing. I was tempted to get out of the Breeders' Academy. I figured, okay, that's what I need to know. But he said, I had time before my membership canceled. So I was going to go through the website and see what else was there. And he was like, every time I turned the corner or opened the page, I was learning more and more nuggets. It was everywhere I looked, there was a nugget. And he says he's been a member for 3 years now, still finding nuggets, and saying he just decided he's going to stay. He's just going to learn because we're adding new material. These videos we're doing right now are huge. I can't believe how many members are telling me how much they love this material.
You wouldn't give a money back guarantee if you wasn't that confident in it, Kenny. So that's proof in the pudding right there is a money back guarantee. So I mean, that shows you how much confidence we have in the founders program.
Yeah,
because
the whole Breeders' Academy.
Well, the whole academy itself, but there's nothing like it for one ever. But it allows you to basically do the upwork to make your fowl better each breeding season and also hold them where they're at the time. There's no other program that does that. No other program.
Now, there are going to be times when you're going to feel like you need to introduce new blood. Okay. And it may be necessary someday to improve genetic diversity, maybe give it some of the variation that it needs. But it's one I always tell people be cautious of and be careful and make sure it's the last resort. And we're talking about like outcrossing and crossbreeding. But these are risky when you think about it. They have their problems. You're introducing new blood, introducing unwanted recessive, a lot of times lethal genes. So there's a lot of problems with adding new blood. And I don't usually have a problem with it if it's the first stage or phase of the founders program, because sometimes you don't know what you have until you start breeding. And if you can't get the results you're looking for to move forward, then that's when to do it. But once you have a foundation line, man, I would really tell people try not to do that unless they're using a subline, and they're very careful about that subline. This is the area I really hesitate to go into, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Well, and too, Kenny, I want to warn them to other people. They'll get, way into the program, and then they decide, well, I want to change the leg color. I want to change the plumage color. You have to be careful. Very
I want to
careful.
get it more station.
That's right. Yeah.
Which can actually be, I want to say this before I get too far, because I don't want you to get the wrong idea. Station can be improved through selectively breeding within the strain by looking for the birds with the higher station and just keep moving forward. Eventually you'll get there, but you'll never add like a Peruvian or whatever bird you want to add to them
to get it
and get that in one generation. It may seem like it because of hybrid vigor, but once you start breeding them a little further, you're going to see it's all over the place, and you realize that you create too much genetic diversity and they just didn't get there like you thought. And there's a reason for that. So selective breeding or selectively breeding is exactly what it says. You're looking for the birds that are improving your strain in a certain area. You keep breeding to those. Eventually you get there. It can be a slow process sometimes, but understand that's the way it's done.
Have to have patience.
Yeah. Patience is big. Yep.
Much.
Also bring in new blood. We were talking about the different problems that are associated with it. Compromise health. Okay. Because you're throwing a lot of new genes in there. Whatever those birds have, now your birds have. Look at the ancestry that may be in those, because they might be crosses, they might be mongrels. So you can only imagine all the stuff that's in there. Now you've introduced that into your blood. You're also looking at lower constitutional vigor a lot of times, poor disease resistance, along with compromised health, lower constitutional vigor. Disease resistance is not improved by introducing new blood. It's never introduced in one generation. Those are the kind of things that takes many generations to improve, but can be lost by breeding to the wrong bird. So it's important to know that when you're lacking something, then adding new blood doesn't actually improve the situation. It makes it worse. And understand that nothing can be improved through one infusion or one breeding of outside blood, that is.
It's always down the line where you start seeing the benefits or the negativity of that breeding.
Yeah. We're going to do an episode, master's class video on how to create a strain through breeding for resistance to disease, how to improve disease resistance in a strain, I guess you could say. And I think that's going to be a really important one. I cover it quite a bit throughout the website, but I want to make a specific program course and video on that, on how to do that. And just know that it's over many generations, you're going to create a family that's resistant to disease, not just by breeding in new blood. It's just not going to happen. I'm actually looking forward to that. It's on my list, by the way. So we're going to do that. But another way of getting around adding new blood, especially when you're into the foundation stage, is that line crossing. That's always a better alternative, because you have multiple lines. Each line is going to be a little bit different, but they're going to be within the same family. And if this particular line is lacking something, then I can go to this other line that's doing better in that area, breed it to those birds. I'm not adding outside blood, and I can start maybe improving that line by, let's say one's lacking station. Well, I can go to line A and say, okay, I'm getting really good station over there. Take the best bird in that line, breed it to the best bird in line C, let's say, work on the station and improve it. They're like insurance policies. Each line helps protect the other one. Okay.
That's it. And we'll get into this more as we go, but just want to put it out there. You're moving the cocks. That hen stays in that group they're on. So you're rotating the cocks, but we're going to get into that as we go more into it.
Yeah. So, but I want to be very careful to say this too, that the process of the Founders Program is really important, that you follow it from beginning to end, all the way to the rotational system, because a lot of people are, A lot of people want to jump into the rotational system right away without doing the cleanup, the fixation, the cloning of traits, things like that. And
Dangerous.
when you're getting into a system that's similar to a rotational system like the line crossing, what we'd be basically talking about, and we'll be covering this too, would be clan mating, also known as spiral mating. That's a rotational system.
Mm-hmm.
Those systems are great for maintaining a strain, but it's best to use those when you have a foundation. Now, if you're just throwing birds together that are unrelated, or maybe they're related but they have many faults, and you're trying to rotate those, that progress is so slow. Okay, you can maintain them by selecting, because you're usually looking at the numbers. I'm looking at, say I have a pen, I want to maintain 12 hens in each pen. I've got a rooster that I'm rotating. So you're culling by the numbers. And some of the selection is limited because you have to keep the numbers. So improvement can be very slow, because you're not pinpointing, you're not breeding to specific pairs or whatever, like we did in the beginning. So understand that a rotational system like a clan mating and spiral mating is a great maintenance, and it's even in the founders program, but it's actually after you've done all the work. So be careful not to just say, okay, I got a group of birds, I'm going to clan mate them. I think that's where most people fail.
That's
And
true.
then the trick to that too, and this is what amazes people as well, is if you're running a clan mating system or a spiral mating system, which is a rotational system, you run another system alongside of it, parallel to it, which is an improvement program, which is basically a line breeding program. So all the birds that you're using in the line breeding program or being produced by the line breeding program are being infused into the rotational system to improve them. That way you're going to make more improvement, because you're actually putting really good birds to replace the worst birds over here. Okay. And in each family in the clan mating system, and you need at least three. I mean, three. Let me hold all three
At least
fingers up.
three.
Okay. You need at least three to make it work. But each, like red, blue, green, red has its own line breeding program parallel to it. Green has its own line improvement program, some running simultaneously with that one, and the same with the other one. So the birds from each of those lines go into those relative pens, and then you improve them from there. And with that system, because you've done the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, you've done 4, which is line breeding. Now you've done your line crossing. Now you're creating your maintenance program, which is a rotational system. Then you have a parallel system running from that, which is your improvement program. They're working with each other there. You're not going to do those other systems anymore unless you create a whole new strain. Now, all you have once you got to the foundation stage is your spiral mating, your rotational system over here, your improvement line breeding program over there, and one is proven the other, but you're maintaining the line. That's when you know you've made it. That's when you've known you've finished the program. But now it's just a balancing act of keeping them there, improving a little by little. It's the improvement program that's going to improve the strain. It's the rotational program that's going to maintain it.
The work's still there. And I actually, you have to work just as hard as you did from the beginning to keep them that way, and make sure we're going to do a record. I guess it's going to be one of the master class ones, but we're going to do a record keeping on that too, which is very important. But
Nancy's working on the initial stages of the outline, and then I'm going to go in and do my magic with the outline, and then we're going to record it. So I've got Nancy setting up the foundation for the outline, and then I'm going to go in and put my stuff in there, and we're going to make it a complete program, and then we're going to do a video on that. So just know the record keeping is coming. It's just that I need to move forward, and that one's going to slow me down just a little bit because I'm working from scratch. I do have some courses in articles inside the Breeders' Academy on record keeping, so check those out. That'll be a good start. But
that's a good question, though.
Yeah, he needs to tell me what program or what method he's talking about exactly.
I think he's talking about the rotational, but just to be sure.
Okay, let's go there for now until he tells me different.
Okay.
And if, let's say you got a rotational program, the number of hens is dependent on you. Okay. You can do it with 2 or 3 hens per pen. To me, that's a low number. You can make that work. I've seen some people do it. A good number for a proper, to me, the way I like to do it would be like 12 hens per line, per rotational program. So line A or I usually do red, blue, green. Red has 12 hands, blue has 12 hands, green has 12 hands, and then I rotate the cocks. Okay. And then even the improvement programs, they're labeled by blue, red, green too. So that's what I like because it gives me some play, some wiggle room, but when you're dealing with a rotational program, you're dealing with numbers. So if I'm maintaining 12 hens, I'm maintaining the best 12 hens I have in that line. Okay. That's how I'm managing my selection. That's how I'm managing my culling. But you have to go run through the rest of the process before you get there, because if that's where you start, you're going to have a lot of problems in
problems.
there. Mm.
Yeah. And these hens, once you, like Kenny was talking about, red, blue, green, once you put them in that pen, they're there for life. They stay there.
Yeah.
Unless you just do away with them.
Yeah. So we're talking about line breeding is a better, or line crossing is a better alternative. But like I was saying a second ago, if you're not ready and you haven't prepared yourself for your strain, you're basically going to hit the dead end zone, because a lot of people are creating what they call a strain, or using a breeding program. They get themselves, because they didn't maintain multiple lines, they do get into what they call the dead end zone. And this is where most people fail, because they think at that point, well, they didn't even know they were supposed to create multiple lines. So now they have no choice. We understand it. They're going to bring in outside blood because they can't line breed or inbreed forever. You are going to hit what they call a dead end zone. So
Been
what
there
is it?
Many times.
Yeah.
Been there many a times.
Because they didn't know that. That was a term that a lot of people got mad at me too, some of my mentors, because that was a phrase they only use. I didn't hear that when I was a kid until these guys were saying that. I was like, wow,
Kenny,
that's perfect.
I think that's where the adding blood come from. It's been a debate of line breeding, hitting
the dead end zone. Yep.
Hitting the dead end zone, going adding blood. And I think that's what made the adding blood so popular, because they thought that was the only choice that they really had at that time. And some still do. Yeah.
So basically a dead end zone is breeding to yourself into like 7/8 to 15/16. You have nowhere to go. So you feel like it's time to add new blood. Basically, you're compromising the gene pool. You're changing the strain forever. You're starting over. Those are the three things: changing the gene pool, changing the strain forever, and starting over, that they don't realize they're doing, because they have it in their mind that they can say, okay, I've got a pure family. They've been pure this for this long. Okay, I've only adding new blood to kind of refreshen the blood. Then I breed it out. Well, they didn't breed anything out, because many of those genes, especially the recessives, all stay. They never go anywhere. Once they're in, they never leave. If they've bred anything out, it's the homozygous dominant genes, which is the ones they really need it the most. Okay. They've eliminated the best parts of the bird, actually.
That's big. A lot of them. And it's still a huge number right now. And I think you agree with this, Kenny. A lot of them think they can breed anything they want, as much of it as they want, and breed it back out.
Yep.
And that's far from the truth. Once it's in there, you may hide it. You may not hide it. But I promise you, just because it's not showing it doesn't mean it's not in there, because it is. It's still in there.
Okay, so right now we're going to address some of the various methods of breeding that are used for creating a strain, and the differences between breeding methods and breeding programs. Okay. Ask yourself, are you using the right method of breeding for the right purpose? Are you using the right method at the right time? And this is why the Founders Program works so well, because it really helps you out with knowing which method to use and then how long to use it and what purpose you're using it for. So I would say many breeders are not only selecting their broodfowl poorly, but they're using the wrong methods, the wrong breeding methods at the wrong time for the wrong length of time. The results are never what they expected, or they're short-lived, or they're forced into adding new blood. So let's learn which methods to use and when, and why it's best to use a breeding program rather than just a method. A great breeding program, like the Founders Program, uses multiple breeding methods for a specific purpose, specific time, for a specific length of time. Let's examine these methods, and then hopefully we'll have a better understanding of how they work and which methods to use and when. Okay, let's start with crossbreeding. And I want to cover this, not to diminish it or try to pick on it.
Your favorite.
But only because this is where most people are starting. They're starting with birds that are either crossed, mongrels. They're the product of multiple breedings. The parents are from different bloodlines. Even if someone says that you've got a pure strain, you've got a trio or a pair from a pure strain, established strain. Let's assume that they're not, because we most likely have some cleanup to do no matter what.
Yeah.
So basically what is crossbreeding? So we can decipher between crossbreeding and outcrossing. Crossbreeding is a breeding of different breeds. In this case, it's breeding like American Games to a Sills or American Games to Peruvian. That's true crossbreeding. When we start talking about two-way crosses, that's basically hybridization. Okay, that has an effect on the offspring, which can give you a different indication of what their true value is. When we start talking about 3- and 4-way crosses, now we're into mongrelization, because we got multiple bloodlines. A lot of the traits are working against each other. Some were eliminated in the process, and then some were weakened. That's not bad exactly, because when I'm telling people to select their seed fowl, you're just looking for a cock and hen that represent what you're looking for. So we're looking at the phenotype of the bird. What is that bird showing you? Does it have the traits you're looking for? Is it something that you would like to perpetuate and improve on or make more of? So that's what we have to start with, because I can't imagine very often that many of you are able to go to someone's yard, besides maybe me and Frank, and I can think of maybe a couple more, where you're going to get a good family and say, okay, I got a good family. I'm jumping right into stage 5 of the founders program. I'm going to start cloning them, even in that case, Frank, we're still telling people start from the beginning.
I do.
Yeah.
Every time this is brought up, I tell them, it's their foul. They have a decision to make. But if it was me and I knew the guy personally and knew he was a great breeder, I would still do it, Kenny. Even if it was on those terms, I would.
Yeah. Just assume that you're dealing with birds with a lot of bloodlines in them, or we got to work through it. So when we're looking at crossbreeding, what are the benefits? Okay. When it comes to creating a strain, not a whole lot, but the idea of crossbreeding improves hybrid vigor, higher production performance ability, higher vigor and stamina, but it's a short-term plan. Okay. It's not a long-term plan. The offspring from that, most likely you're not going to breed to, you're not going to move forward with. They have a one-time purpose. That's what they're there for. And then you move on. We're just taking it a step farther, because we're going to have to use those as seed fowl. And that's why the Founders Program was created the way it was. It was meant to take crosses, take unrelated birds, take mongrels, and create a family from that. That's the nice thing about the Founders Program.
That's the great part of it. We can actually use those birds that people has crossbred to start a family. And there's some nice birds out there that's meant, like you said, Kenny, that's mongrels that they can actually turn into a really, really nice strain.
Yeah. People think when I say mongrels, it's a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing when that's all you're doing is adding new blood all the time, and you're just accentuating the mongrelization process. But it's not a bad thing when you're trying to look for seed fowl and create a strain from that, because all you care about is not what the bloodline, not what its name, not what's the whatever bloodlines in it, not the percentage of blood that's in there. We're just looking at the phenotype of the bird. Is it what we like? Does it have what we're looking for? Can we build something from it? That's all. So I'm not.
The only thing we're saying when Kenny says, the mongrelization or a mongrel, the only thing we're saying is it can be a bad thing if they're not bred correctly. But put in a good solid program like the Founders Program, it can be a great thing to start out with a mongrel. It really can. You can use that to your benefit, and this program allows you to do that.
Yeah, the only time I'm down on or have a problem with mongrelization is when you got cross birds and you just keep adding new blood, just creating more mongrel, more more mongrel flocks, especially when you're dealing with 3- and 4-way crosses.
You're taking Lake Erie and tapping it to the Mississippi, just putting more water in it, making it crazy,
It's amazing how much people are paying for, I'm going to just say it, either hybrid crosses or mongrels. They're buying a trio that they think are pure, or sometimes the breeder he's just selling you cross fowl, mongrels, or he's selling you a pure cock and a pure hen that are unrelated. And you're paying a lot of money for this. The downside for some people, but the genius side of the Founders Program is that the birds you're starting with as seed fowl, they're used basically one time, and then you get rid of them. They're only there to get the family started. So you're paying a lot of money for seed fowl to only have one job. Okay. And the only time you would use them a second time is if the offspring that are produced from that are not better than them, then you'd use one of them for the back cross, which is stage 2.
Yeah.
Okay, to move forward. Once you got offspring that are better than the parents, then you would get rid of those parents. And that's
You're
a
right.
hard thing for people to accept.
You're right.
If that's one part of the founders program that I have a problem with, that's the biggest one right there.
You're right too, Kenny. And the way they do this, say they send off and they get a trio from a breeder that sells chickens for a living, and they get those and they just keep breeding the hen to the cock to the two hens. And when they get old and they can't breed anymore, while they do, they send back, get another trio, bring those back. They do the same thing over again. So really, they're not even trying to make a strain. They're just breeding what they buy. And that's a lot of people nowadays. A lot of people.
Yeah. BSA writer says, not understanding how they can use mathematical percentages on genes. Never understood it. It's the only way they can rationalize it in their head, that saying that it has 3/4 hatch and 1/4 Kelso in it, because they've done their 3 and 4-way crosses in such a way that they've isolated into those percentages, which is not even true, because a trait's a trait. It was a good one. I'm just going to use comb type because everybody knows what it is. I mean, we could use any part of the bird, but a straight comb is a straight comb. That's a straight comb gene. Now, I guess we could use color because that's usually pretty good to represent this, but a certain color is just the color. It doesn't say that it's related to a certain breed or strain. You can't say, oh, because he's a certain color, he's a claret, because there's a lot of birds that have that color. It's just the color. It doesn't carry. So that color is not only not correlated with a particular breeder, but it's not correlated with the other parts of the bird, the other traits of the bird, the performance of the bird, the temperament of the bird. It's just a trait. Okay, so those percentages don't work. Next to the name game, the percentage game is another one that I'm always climbing uphill, because this is ingrained in people's head. They think it's a real thing, and we do everything we can to fight against it. I'm not trying to crush their beliefs or anything exactly. I'm just trying to get them to see it a different way, you know?
Yeah.
Because they're not going to move forward with those beliefs.
And I'm telling you from experience, once I stopped doing that, I become a better breeder just by doing that alone, Kenny. When I started looking at the birds I was breeding in an overall, and I took the percentages out of them, it helped me become a better breeder just by doing that much. That much.
The only time the percentages work, but it's not attached to a breed or a strain or anything like that, is when you're doing your line breeding program. When you breed the cock to a hen, you got the offspring. Well, yes, that offspring is half the father for the most part and half the mother. Now, it can be skewed a little bit depending on who got what from each parent. We're looking at dominant recessive traits. Some are going to be canceled out. Some polygenic traits are going to either be diminished or improved. We're talking about the prepotency of the cock versus the mitochondrial DNA of the hen. But in general, you can say we've got 50-50 for the most part. Okay, then you breed the cock to his daughter and we get the offspring. And now we can say that 3/4 of the bloodline goes to the father. But we're showing that we're getting more intensity from the father into the offspring. Okay, then you go to 7/8 and 15/16. And the closer we can keep breeding the offspring to that particular bird to clone him, the closer we can get to replicating him, the more percentage of his blood's in the offspring. I kind of said that backwards, I think. Yeah. But that's where the percentages work for me.
It's the makeup of that parent. Is what you half the makeup, 3/4 of the makeup, 7/8, that sort of thing.
We're getting into people. I'm seeing some people changing their mind. They're kind of getting it, but a lot of people fight it.
It's tough.
They don't want it. Yeah.
And you mentioned old school. That is about as old school as you can get right there, doing the percentages. Like 3/4 hatch, 3/4 Kelso, half Democrat. You see this, even though it's old school, you see a tremendous amount of it still today.
Yeah.
A lot.
So then we go into outcrossing, which is basically the breeding of two birds from the same breed, but different strain that are unrelated. But still, we're talking about a lot of dangers because we don't know how that person bred it. And when we're looking at American games, there really isn't two strains that are the same anyways. I mean, one man's hatch is different than another man's hatch, Kelso and Kelso, they're just different. So we can't rely on outcrossing. Outcrossing to me has always been non-existent when it came to American game, but do exist for the most part when we're looking at domestic chickens. There's just nothing kept pure Like now, Tony and I might be able to do it because him and I have the same strain of the original Colonel Givens. I call him the Maximus line. He has his. Our birds came from the same trio or the same pair. He got some, I got some. Okay. Now, as long as he hasn't put new blood in him, which I don't think he has, then I could go to him, but then I run the challenge of what has he done to him? How has he changed them? Because his eye is different than mine. He's from the Old English breeding. He breeds for like the Carlisle type and things like that.
They're more boxy.
Yeah, if you look at his birds compared to mine, and they came
Yours
from the
are
same,
more
they're so
streamlined.
different. They're just so different.
You're right.
So mine would change if I go to Tony.
Yeah.
But he has the same bloodline. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
So the idea for outcrossing for most people, if it were true, would be improving the weakness in the strain, if it has one, improving the traits in the strain, and are the initial stages of the Korean strain. Because like I said, a lot of times our seed fowl are going to be crosses. They are going to be mongrels. Some of them were the product of outcrossing. I still think of outcrossing as very dangerous. You're introducing genetic weaknesses and you're a lot of times introducing disease. Let me tell you a story because this is, I know this is domestic chickens. It doesn't really apply in some ways to game fowl, but it may for some of you. What was it? It might have been 10 years now ago. Nancy and I were thinking about having a flock of domestic chickens for more eggs and meat and things like that. So we were looking for different breeds. We kind of settled on the Well Summers, and everybody I talked to kind of leaned me towards two people. One was on the East Coast, one was on the West Coast. And so I called the one on the East Coast and said, "Tell me about your birds. Do you have any for sale? What they cost? What's the availability?" And she was telling me all that. And I said, "Okay, tell me what their common defects are." And she was saying that for the most part, they're pretty good. They got good type, good conformation. Overall, they have good color, but I am starting to get white in the wings. And I go, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah. I was trying to improve egg color. So I borrowed a cock from a friend of mine or a rooster from a friend of mine. And then all of a sudden I started getting a white in the wings. I've been fighting it ever since." I go, "Oh, okay. Huh." So then I called the one on the West Coast and says, okay, asked her basically the same questions, wanted to get an idea of her birds. I asked her what the common defect was, and she says, good type, good conformation, good temperament, has this and that, good egg quality, but I get white in the wings from time to time. It's one of my battles. I go, is that something that's inherent in this breed? Because I'm starting to hear this more and more. And she said, no, not really, but it's been something that I fought all along. And I says, well, I was talking to someone on the East Coast who has the same problem. She goes, "Oh yeah, because she borrowed a cock from me so she can improve egg color." So that lady on the East Coast wasn't having any problems with white in the wings until she borrowed a cock from somebody else, and now she does, just to improve egg color. And that's something that's going on these days. So outcrossing can be very dangerous. And if you're going to do that, I always tell people never right away include that in your foundation strain, create a subline, play with that and see what pops up after a number of generations, and if that improves and does better, then maybe you can, make that your foundation, or maybe, you'll improve your foundation with it. Who knows? But I'm seeing that more and more. So outcrossing is very dangerous.
That's not to mention what else she got that she didn't tell you, Kenny.
Yeah, it's true too. Or she hasn't noticed yet because it was still soon.
Or it just hasn't come out yet, So
yeah.
you could call her up now and say, how you doing with them since you've had that blood? And she could probably maybe tell you a horror story or a lot more problems that come about them,
Yeah. Okay. The next method that we're using in the Founders Program would be back crossing, which is stage 2. Now we'll go more in depth in this when we get into that stage, but let's highlight some of them now. It's the breeding of offspring back to the parents, but a lot of people confuse it with line breeding. Just because you're breeding back to the parents once or twice isn't line breeding, and they have different purposes and different functions. Line breeding is the cloning of a bird. You're basically taking that bird, bring it from each generation until you get to 15 16ths or 7/8 of the blood, and the whole idea is to clone that rooster. Now back crossing is a whole different story. You're basically taking the offspring back to the parents until you get offspring that are better than the parents, and then you move forward. So it could happen in one generation, it can happen 2, maybe you have to do more. But back crossing has a different function than line breeding. It's just to get offspring that are better than parents and move forward. So a lot of people confuse that, Frank.
Yeah, and it, it has its setbacks too.
Yep.
By doing that, so you want to be careful. You want to do it the right way, like Kenny said, and the only difference in it and line breeding is you're not going as many times back. You're only going a couple times, and that's only if needed, right, Kenny?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because if the offspring are better than the parents, then you'll skip the back crossing
Exactly.
process and go right into the inbreeding, because you're only trying to make sure that the seed fowl that you started with is being translated into the offspring. Okay.
Mhm.
But a lot of people are trying to start a strain or seed fowl or with birds with really poor quality. And so a lot of times you're not going to see the results you want because you're starting with really bad fowl in the first place. So it's really important to take your time and find seed fowl that are high quality. It's a superior bird because chances are, if you've picked properly, you're not going to have to use back crossing at all. You could probably go right into inbreeding. But a back crossing, the process can, if you need to, be pushed to 15 16ths or 7/8 of the breeding, just like you would a line breeding program. I really see that though. Because of the purpose of back crossing and what it's used for, 1 or 2 generations is usually more than enough to get you started. Okay.
Yeah, and that's only if I have to. A lot of times when you're starting from unrelated birds, usually you don't have to go this route, but it's nice to have it in case you do.
Yeah. But it's important to stop back crossing when you start seeing faults being expressed.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you only want to go as far as you need to get offspring that show some improvement over the parents. Then you can move forward and then ban the whole thing after that. So that's the main thing. But also make sure that when you're back crossing, because it has such a specific purpose, that you do line mating. I mean, single mating. Make sure you do single mating.
Yes, for sure.
That's important.
Very important.
Now, we talked about inbreeding quite a bit. Let's just highlight some of it. Inbreeding, a lot of people look at it. Line breeding can be inbreeding. Breeding aunts to nephews and uncles to nieces can be considered inbreeding. I don't really. I know some people look at it that way.
Not
to me,
birds.
inbreeding, because they have their own, line breeding is line breeding. Okay. It's not inbreeding to me. Then you got the aunts to nephews and uncles to niece. That has its own name. They call that inbreeding. Okay. So to me, inbreeding is brother and sister. It's the closest method that you can use. So how does it help you? How does this method help you to get where you want to go? Not a great breeding method, but it's a great tool. Great tool for intensifying the genes. It's great for locking the genes. It's great for fixing the genes and the traits. It's also great for cleaning up the bloodline. Like we can use it in stage 3 of the Founders Program to get that fixation so we can move forward. But let's say you get to the end of the Founders Program. Let's say you're in the foundation stage, and for some reason you want to clean them up even more. You can do some inbreeding at that point if you want to. Get a little more uniformity, more consistency. And it's really cool because you're not going to see the same results you would in stage 3 as you would later on in a foundation line, because they're going to be more uniform, more consistent. You would have spent more time cleaning up the bloodline, getting the defects out of there already. So what you'll see, if you've done your job right, is you'll see some offspring that are maybe not that great, but not as many as you'd think. But from there, you still want to select the standouts. You don't want to breed all of them. So you're going to be very selective, even in an inbreeding program that's further down into the foundation stage. But still, it's a great tool for cleaning up the line. Yeah. And I recommend that you do that once in a while.
I've used it in the past, and it works really great, Kenny. And one other thing I'd like to mention, just like Kenny said, it will intensify the traits, but it intensifies bad and good traits that's in the bird. So
yeah,
you want to make sure that your selection is on key for this.
That's why it's a cleaning up process.
That's right.
Because it's going to expose those so you can eliminate them. And that's what people say, oh, it'll expose the traits. Well, they leave out the part so you can eliminate them. Because I think what I missed, I didn't say earlier, when they make a big deal that it exposes the bad traits, is a lot of them take it as, okay, well, the bloodlines, there's something wrong with it. So they say, okay, I won't breed them because it produced some bad birds. Well, that's what it was meant to do. It's just your job to eliminate those bad birds, select the standouts, and move forward. That's something they don't tell you when they talk about inbreeding. They just say it's a tool for showing you what's in the line. And that could mean eliminate the line because you saw some faults. or the proper way is to eliminate the faults, take the stand out to move forward. They don't say that.
Yeah. What I was getting at more, and I should have explained it better than that. From looks, you could have a perfect bird. You know, from looks, from afar, perfect bird. But when you pick them up, you can find defects on him, like a quick kill bone, a mental stability where he would just flat try to kill you. You know, there's other things. You have to look inside and out. So that's key to being very, very magnifying glass when you're selecting.
Yeah. So inbreeding, one of the other benefits would be that you get progress faster. Like I said, it's really tough to create a strain without it. I guess you could, but it would take forever without inbreeding. Inbreeding just it accentuates and it speeds up the process.
And we've talked about this before, Kenny. As far as being a great selector, there's breeders, successful breeders, well-known breeders that, and Kenny's mentioned this, we've mentioned this in other shows and stuff, that does this every year. This is how they do it. Now, I don't recommend that for anyone. They have to be very good to do what they do with this.
And I'm glad you said that, because I've said that before, where I know some breeders that do breed, they do use inbreeding all the time, but they know how to do it. They breed for birds with high vigor, good health, and all that. They are quick to cull anything that has a fault, but I don't recommend it. I don't promote it. I know it. I hope I don't sound like I am, but yeah, I don't promote it. I just know that shows how, if it's done right, it can be used quite a bit without getting the inbreeding depression that they're all worried about.
Well, so used it as you teach it, as we teach it, to me, is the way to do it. Now, once they get up and they're more experienced breeders, yeah, they may be able to tackle that and get away with it. But I would stick to the Founders Program alone, you know, for right now anyway, until they got up to where they was brave enough to tackle something of that sort.
And read my course inside the website on inbreeding. It'll really open your eyes. Okay. So the downsides of inbreeding is, like Frank says, it does produce good birds, but it also produces bad birds. It has a possibility of creating inbreeding depression, but it's harder to get to that point than you would think. I'll say it real quick, is if the offspring are not hatching, or they're lethargic and they're maybe even dying or having problems right after hatching, that's probably a pretty good sign of inbreeding depression, but it's not inheritable. So that you can work around that. It's I don't think it's anything to be feared. You could see, which would have something to do with inbreeding depression, poor hatchability or weak chicks, lower vigor, but selection's a key. You got to cull ruthlessly, and it should be used haphazardly as a breeding method, like we were talking about. Those people are doing it. But like I said, if you're selecting for good vigor and good health, you're not going to have a lot of these problems. And we're not recommending that you do it over and over again. It has a purpose. It's a tool. It's going to get you to the next step. I mean, most of the time in the Founders Program, you may do only 1 or 2 inbreedings, and then you're going to move forward. Okay. So I don't really recommend that you do a whole bunch of them unless you need to.
Yeah. And I'll go back to the old guy that was pushing me away from inbreeding. He told me, whatever you do, never inbreed. Well, make a long story short, that's what his success story was. That's how he was getting all these birds uniform and predictable, and that was his little secret that his sons let out after his death. And I think a lot of people are still doing that. Now, some, I will agree, doesn't know any better because that's what they've been told, or they've tried it, like Kenny has mentioned. They get some bad stuff out of it, and boy, they bail real fast. But if used in a right way, I'm like Kenny. I believe the same way Kenny does on this. I believe that's the only way to make a pure family and do it right.
Yep. So let's move on to line breeding. What is line breeding? Line breeding is the breeding of a common ancestor for multi-generations, the breeding of father to daughter, grandfather to granddaughter, and great-grandfather to great-granddaughter, and it's used for cloning a bird, a superior bird. Let's put it that way, okay? Yes. And you should only use single mating when doing it. But you should have multiple lines of line breeding so that when you're ready to go, when it's time to line cross, so right away, right after you're inbreeding, you're collecting enough birds from that inbreeding process to create at least 3 line breeding programs. So the question I get a lot is this method used for starting a program, or is it just a maintenance program? And I would say basically no to both of those. I don't like to look at it as a maintenance program. It has a specific function, and I don't think it should be used to start a strain. Has one purpose, but insufficient in the end. So basically what we're talking about, a lot of people think of it as the beginning, middle, or the end of a program. It's just a method that's used in a bigger program. Okay. It's stage 5 of our program, so it shows you where it's at. It's not the program, but it's important for the program. Okay. So if we look at like the Founders Program, breeding programs use multiple breeding methods for a specific purpose at a specific time for a specific length of time. And line breeding is just one part of that.
And I think it's the biggest misused method that's really out there, Kenny. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, because they don't understand it. You know, if they understood its purpose, but again, they don't know what else to do. You know, they don't understand that there's other methods to be used before and after it, that it's not just one method in a bigger program. So I can't blame them, but that's what we're here for. That's what we're trying to do now, is show them where line breeding fits in.
They've been taught that way.
So what are the downsides of line breeding? Most fail when line breeding. They breed to the dead end zone with nowhere to go. They don't understand the importance of line crossing, which makes inbreeding work. You got to know when to stop. A lot of people don't know when to stop line breeding.
That's really key in all the methods. Really, you've got to know when too much is too much and when enough's enough. That's key, and that's another trainable thing. You know, you just once you get good on selection, this will be key on doing this as well. When you know when you're starting to go downhill, and then know where to stop.
If you're setting up a line breeding program and you're not planning on doing a line crossing at the end, then you've already failed. You've done the line breeding for nothing, because I've seen so many people do a really good job of line breeding and really advance their strain, and it's really taking shape. They have nowhere to go. So they bring in outside blood thinking they need to refresh them, and they completely start it over completely. And it's just a shame because they didn't prepare properly. They didn't create multiple lines of the same family, and then they destroyed everything they did. I just see that happening so often. So go ahead.
To be honest though, Kenny, a lot of them, when they add blood, they're really not. Now, this is some of them, and I've seen this a lot. They're starting over, but really a lot of them, they're not even going through them and weeding them out for defects. They're not being very selective. They're raising maybe a clutch and breeding from that. So a lot of them's really just not even in the ballpark when it comes to that. And I'm saying, when I say a small amount, I'm going to say 45%, if not half. I'm being generous at that. They don't even realize what a defect is, so they don't even have them cleaned up till it gets to that. So I really pity the ones that would actually clean them up, do all that hard work, and then do that. That's just unthinkable to do that.
Well, you know, we said all the time that the defect course is a blessing and a curse all in one. You know, because they didn't realize what was out there, what defects were out there, and they didn't know what to do about it. They didn't know how detrimental they are to the strain, and they just thought, oh, it's just a defect. Yeah, it's ugly. We won't breed to it, but they didn't really understand, you know, how harmful it actually was. And sometimes they actually breed to them because they think they can get away with it. They don't think it's a big deal. BSA Ryder is saying when line breeding, is it one cock to one hen? Yes, it's always single mating. What you're doing basically, and we'll get into that, is you're breeding. Let's say you have a superior cock that you want to clone. So you breed it to your best hen in that line. The offspring from that, you pick the best hens, you breed that cock to his daughter. Okay, now you might have multiple daughters, and you might set up multiple pens, and you breed to each one of them to see which one comes best. And you can do that. But understand, too, that if you're looking at 3 hens and one of them stands out more than the other, you need to get rid of the other 2 hens because you only want to breed to the best ones anyways. You don't want to – the phenotype, that's why I think the phenotype is so important. So, yeah, you're going to single mate them. Then the offspring from that, you're going to pick the best daughters from that, and you'll breed that cock to his granddaughters, and you'll keep going until you get to 15, 16ths, or 7/8, or until you start running into problems. You start running into problems, you start seeing defects show up, that's the time to stop. That doesn't mean nothing bad's happened. It just means you got to go back one generation and say, okay, I bred them too far. Okay. And hopefully you've created enough birds to get that cloning process that we're talking about, that you've created stags from that are really close to the father, to the great great grandfather, or whatever you want to say.
Only if it's a superior hen that you're wanting to clone, or superior cock. That would be your main goal, is to reproduce that cock or that hen. That's the only reason.
And he's asking per line, and I'm saying yes.
Yeah.
Now, I always say at least 3 lines per family. So if I'm doing a line breeding process, I want at least 3 lines. You can have more, but each cock is going to be bred to his best daughter each generation. Okay. But I have 3 or 4 or 5 lines of that working at the same time.
Yeah.
So per line. Yeah.
And say you go to the third mating, the 3/4 mark, and you say, okay, these birds look really, really good. I'm liking what they say. I'm going to breed them again. You breed him back to his daughter again the next following year, and they kind of go downhill on you. They're not as bad. Well, you want to cull those out, keep the one that looked the best. So you keep the 3/4 and go that route with him. So,
yeah. So don't keep going because you think you need to. If,
right,
like Frank said, if you get to 3/4 and everything's looking good and you go one more generation, they start looking bad, you stop.
Right.
Okay. You go back to the 3/4 and you create new, you do your line crossing, and then you create new line breeding programs. If you're not going to use a clan mating or spiral mating system as your rotational system, along with the improvement at the end to maintain the family, then what you would do is you would do your line breeding at the end of 15, 16, 7, 8. You do your line crossing with the 3 lines or more. Then from the offspring from that, from each line, you would establish new line breeding programs from your best birds. That's when best of the best comes into play. Okay. So from your best birds, you reestablish your line breeding. You breed them to 7, 8s, 15, 16s again. You do your line crossing. You keep doing that. Like everybody says, I have a pure strain. I only bring in outside blood every 5 or 6 years. Well, what they should have had is multiple lines and then line cross them every 5 or 6 years.
They wouldn't have had to broad blood in.
Yeah. Okay. That's how you keep a family going. The idea of having a clan mating or spiral mating system running simultaneously with an improvement program, that's extra. If you want to do that, you can. But you have to at least do what we said. The line breeding program, line cross. Line breeding program, line cross. You keep doing that.
You know,
Did I say that right?
Yeah, you right on key. You've got a family that's just great. You've made them the way you want them. You don't want them to change. Well, you got them at this line crossing, okay? But like Kenny was talking about, you add blood to that, those chickens are gone. That's how many
changed completely.
That's how many good strains have been destroyed over the years. They're gone, never to return again.
No such thing as breeding something in and breeding it back out.
Nope.
They
don't think it changes them. They think they can breed something in and breed it out, and the bird's going to be the same way. Well, that's farthest from the truth, because as soon as you make that mating, they're gone.
And they're not different just a little bit. They're different a lot. And you know what? You're not going to know it till 3 or 4 generations down the road. You're not going to notice it in the next generation. That's what confuses people. Because
and I had them wonder, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened? What happened?
Because last year the offspring were great. They, it shows me the crossing worked, Yeah.
And then about 2 or 3 breedings down, they're literally, I've seen this happen. They're like, I don't know what happened. Just a couple years down, I was breeding them the same way, and then they just fell apart.
Yeah. Okay, so the requirements for line breeding: only line breed to a superior bird, only breed birds having the complete package. They have to be good because we're cloning them. Okay, and you got to cull ruthlessly whatever offspring are not showing proper traits and everything. You got to only breed to the better ones. Okay, the more superior birds. Okay, so let's get into line crossing. We've been talking a lot about this, so we can sum up a lot of it. So what is line crossing? Line crossing is the secret of all breeding that all breeders know, all good breeders, I would say. Line crossing is a breeding of 3 or more separate lines from the same family or strain. You breed your best cock from one line to the best hen of another line. So like we were saying, you breed your best cock from A to the best hen from B, the best cock from B to the best hen from C, and the best cock from C to the best hen from A. Get the offspring from that, pick the birds that you want to create a new line breeding program from, and you reestablish your lines and move forward.
And that's the best way to protect your hard work.
Keep them going.
And keep them going the way they are without losing anything. And we're as long as you do go by the Founders Program and you don't skip anything, you can keep those birds that way for as long as you want. But now if you skip this and skip that and skip this, they're going to go around. It's not going to work unless you take each step the way it's written out or the way that we're doing it in these videos. It has to be that way.
Having multiple lines is an insurance policy. Now let me show you this too. Not only you need them for the line crossing to reestablish genetic diversity and the variation, so that you're not inbreeding them too close. But if one line is having a problem all of a sudden, which can happen, it can go in the wrong direction. Something just showed up, you didn't know it, start multiplying itself. Before you know it, all the offspring have a problem. Could be a defect, could be other things. Then you have the option to either, you can eliminate that line, take some of the birds from the other two lines, create a whole nother line, your third line, and start it over so that you reestablish that third line again.
Man, you was talking about this on mine. Remember the ones that come with the white on their breast just popped out of nowhere? I just removed them. It was done. It's taken care of.
But you want 3 lines. So you go back to line B and C, take 2 of the best birds from that, breed them, create the third line again.
Yeah,
reestablish that third line.
I was lucky. I had more than 3 lines, so I just done away with it. I didn't even replace them. I just let that line out.
And that's another option too. You could do too, because I always say at least 3 lines, but if you can manage more, do it.
Yeah,
absolutely, do it.
Yeah,
I know one guy who manages like 6 or 7 lines. It's great, Yeah, you can manage it.
And another thing, Kenny, I'd like to add to that, having numerous lines that way, not too many that you can't keep up with or afford to feed, or you want as many as you can manage. Okay. But at least 3, like Kenny was talking. But here's the thing. What happens if a predator comes in, takes a bunch of them out? Those lines has got you protected to where you're not completely out, So that's another good thing. A weather come in, Mother Nature, or anything that you can lose your fowl. That's really another insurance policy that you've got, having that many lines.
Yeah. So line crossing is a rotational system of breeding. Line crossing is what makes line breeding possible. Without line crossing, line breeding doesn't work. It's insufficient. It's best to have 3 lines for line crossing to work properly. 2 lines don't work as a rotational system. 2 lines are only crossing back and forth. You try it. I mean, you could. I don't know if you want to waste the time and money to do it, but if you say you have your rotational system proper, you have 3 lines, but I mean, you could see the difference between rotating the cocks from the 3 lines versus taking 2 lines, just crossing them together. It's a completely different thing. Okay. You're not going to get the same genetic diversity. You're not going to get the same variation. It's, and it can't maintain itself generation after generation. It's, actually, it doesn't work. I when we get into the actual line crossing course, which is stage 6 of the Founders Program, we'll go deeper in that.
Yeah, sure. It amazes you how many people does that, though, Kenny. And I'm sure you run into people on coaching calls and everything that would ask you about doing that, like taking 2 brothers and just invert them back, their offspring back and forth with each other. So it's a lot. It's done by a lot of people. It really is.
It's just crossing. You're not going to get the genetic diversity and the variation that you need to keep the family going. They'll burn out. If you just cross birds back and forth, take 2 lines and keep crossing back and forth, it'll burn itself out before you know it. Line crossing, multiple lines, like we talked about, is the best way to go.
It's the only way to go. From my opinion, it's the only way to go.
Yeah. Next course is course 5. So we're going to talk about the 8 stages, the 8-stage breeding process of the Founders Program.
Yeah.
So we're going to sum up the stages and the phases of the Founders Program, and then the next one after that, we're going to go into stage 1.
This has been great. Stage. This has been great. To be able to talk about this stuff, Kenny.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get better. The information's only getting better from here on out. It's pretty good information. It's awesome information from here on out.
Yeah.
The other had to be, it's a have to be to
Mhm.
go along with the program. But from here on out, it's going to be pretty serious in depth breeding.
Yeah. So I'm just going through the founders program the way it's laid out. So the pre-courses we're going through, we're going to go into the stages and the phases, and we'll make our way through it. Then I've got a bunch of other topics we're going to cover as well in the master's class video. So we'll never run out of topics. Okay. Well, now that we're closing the door to the Beers Academy, and we're slowing down everything else, all my attention, or I'd say most of my attention, is going into the master's class videos. That's what everybody's asking me about. They want more of those. I agree. I think they're great. It's going to enhance the website quite a bit. So we're on it. Just let you know, we're on it. We're gonna check out. We're gonna talk to you guys later. Frank, again, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
This is fun. So
it's
we'll
great.
see you guys later. Thanks.
See you guys.